So I'm going to turn it over to you. We are delighted to have you and look forward to everything you tell us.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is so great being in front of you and seeing so many people out here at 12 o'clock during the day. So Frank and I, yes, are excited to co-lead this project that has been in the making, I guess, for quite some time. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. We just wanted you to meet the internal team that is working together. We communicate, hours each week. We are lots of time together. They become family for sure. Through the federal grant, we were able to hire a project director, as you can imagine, with the enormity and scope in addressing something that has not been tackled comprehensively for more than 30 years, that you need somebody who's dedicated to it all the time. So she's helping to help coordinate and keep us aligned and going on the things we need to do. Of course, you've met Frank, but then Homan has been with the system for a very, very long time. He actually used to be the person that did student assignments and helped with like boundary things when new schools were built. So he comes with a wealth of historical knowledge that is critical for us to understand as we move through this. Through the federal grant, we were also able to partner with some people that have greater expertise than we do to help support the work. So Plural Connections Group is a research lab out of Northeastern University. The 4 members of their team are the ones that we work most closely with, that are engineers, data scientists. Definitely have great expertise. They have been working on projects like this with other districts across the country. Ours is definitely different than most that they have done, but their insight and expertise on what has worked or helped other districts has been meaningful for us. When we first started the process, one of the pieces that we wrote into our federal grant as a line item was to have support with community engagement. One of the things that was really important for us when we were talking about applying for the grant and then fleshing out what the activities would be, is to have a robust community engagement plan. What that meant was we wanted to spend lots of time understanding just the community. So Urban Strategies was brought on board. We had to go through a process and all of that stuff. It's not just that we just magically picked them. But they did have a footprint here, and there was a vetting process and all of that. People had to submit proposals and all of that. But because they knew the community, that was important for the selection committee. They were really helpful in the first round, because if you went to any of the listening sessions, whether they were virtual or in person on the front end, that started, let's say soft launch probably was June through December, is that district staff members were not present and standing up in front of groups talking. We really wanted to get a pulse of the community and have understanding from them without it being a one-way conversation. And for us to just come in and say, no, this is why this is needed. Like, it was intentional to say, hear from the community, like, what's important to you? What are the things that are top of mind for you? We gained a lot of information. We really wanted unfiltered comments. So we gained a lot of information that, one, helped us to think about how boundaries could look and what was important that would be actionable towards boundaries. But we also learned a lot of other information from the community too. As many of you may know, we're in the process of a new strategic planning process for 25-30. So a lot of information that came from community members across the entire county is also being utilized to say, what are the other things that are important that can inform direction of excellence for our schools that MAPS don't address. Like, MAPS is really an operational piece. It doesn't address many of the things that people ask us about, but we wanted to make sure all of the information that was heard from the community could be used in actionable ways that we, the district, could truly, this within our circle of influence, that we really could do. So that brings me to why we are here. So the grant is called Fostering Diverse Schools, which is why you see it as a part of this. Couple of things that I want to highlight, and then Frank and I are going to tag team, is that if you're a resident who up here, you know the current boundaries that we have pretty much, for the most part, been intact since the early 1990s, so more than 30 years. However, within that span of time, we know there have been new neighborhoods built, new highways. I think it's been estimated that about 100,000 additional people live here. So there's been lots of changes to the community as a whole, but nothing related to our boundaries have been really touched in a comprehensive way. The only time, or the main time I would say, that boundaries have been addressed is if a new school was built. And of course, you've got to adjust boundaries for enrollment of the schools that are new. So that is primarily when a comprehensive look has happened. Frank can speak a little bit more working with student assignment of why our current boundaries are not working for a lot of our families. There's lots of anecdotes that people have shared with us in the time that I've been here. I've been here now for 5 years. This was probably one of the first things I heard when I came to the district was that, you know, I hope you're going to help with this. And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Let me learn the community first. But it's just not working well with all the growth that we've had. We have families that talk about, you know, being in such close proximity to certain schools, but then having to travel further away from the school that's close to them. So lots of things came up. The other thing that came up in a lot of the conversations was our schools are more segregated now than they were in the 1980s. Like I've heard that over and over and over again from many residents, and that was cause for concern for them. I even heard it from staff members. And so we were excited when this funding became available because it's a complex issue, but locally we did not have the resources to be able to do a comprehensive approach, nor be able to fund the type of community engagement that we have had. Now, while we've heard from a lot of people, there's still a lot of people that we need to be hearing from.
Thank you, Effie. I wanted to speak a little bit to this slide just because she was talking about student assignment. And really, when you see that big, long title with like choice management schools, ultimately what that means is that I'm over student assignment. I'm also over magnet programming. So it's kind of one of those combination things. But I think it's important to note that Dr. McMillian talked about when she came in as chief accuracy officer and working in equity, she heard we need some help with things like choice. We need some help with things like why are our schools getting more and more segregated. And, you know, one of the big points of this project is we looked at, you know, what is causing our schools to get more segregated? Why is that happening? And while choice is an interesting topic and is something that may need to be looked at in the future, right now, what we noticed was only about 10% of our students actually take advantage of choice. They actually do choice applications. So the other 90% are at their schools for other reasons. 70% are actually at their schools because it's their residential zone. That other 20%, if you're curious, things like employee preference, if a teacher moves to a school, they can bring their kid with them. Also sibling preference, if sibling comes up. Probably the biggest one is, you know, we have a lot of transients in our community. And so one of the things that our office, through an equity lens, actually always try to do is allow students to stay at their school, even if they've moved addresses to a different school. So that's that grandfathering in that we do here in Winston-Salem for secondary schools. So I just wanted to add that little piece of, you know, if the ask was, hey, choice is causing this thing, but you're looking at residential boundaries. That's why we're looking at residential boundaries as our first step to sort of really get a baseline, because that's the default state. So that's why we're starting right here. All right, so here we go. Why this matters. All right, so these 4 things that I'm about to talk about are half from what we thought was going to happen and half what we learned through our listening sessions. So when we started this project, the main goal was to, one, fostering diverse schools, to bring students from different backgrounds together, to make more socioeconomically diverse schools. Also to make schools less crowded. But specifically also number 4, to save time and money on transportation. So it was just, we haven't updated, we need to modernize so we can have this win-win situation where we can help 2 major issues that are facing our community. And number 5 actually came in from those listening sessions. One of the things we heard from a lot of families was, we want our kids to be able to stay together with their friends when they go from elementary to middle to high. And that's called feeder patterns. So when we keep students together, you'll see when we show you some of the map options that feeder patterns is one of the major factors. And what's really great is that you'll see that all of these things can be improved without paying for one with the other. So, so as we move on to the maps, you'll see a little bit more about that.
So, one of the things that we talked about when it came to diversity, so people talk about diversity. That's one of the questions that asked, matter of fact, if you went to the listening session, they asked, like, what are your thoughts about it? And so we heard a range of things. Our project, one of our key prongs for this is around socioeconomic diversity. And as we've been having conversations with more and more people across the community, we're also helping them to understand how it was defined. Oftentimes, in the conversation is that with socioeconomic diversity, that it's looked at as just income only. But we know there's much more to that. And there's not necessarily one single definition out there that defines it. And so as we were looking at our district, these were the numbers 1 through 5 are the 5 factors that was taken into consideration for socioeconomic diversity. So yes, median family income, adult educational attainment, so high school only, or some college or advanced degrees, like that is a part of educational attainment. Percentage of single parent households. So in a community you may have, I raised my daughter as a single parent in a pretty mixed income neighborhood. So I would have been those ones that would have come up in the single parent category. Percent of home ownership, so looking at home ownership versus rental, and then population, the percent of the population that speaks a language other than English. Race was not a factor considered into this. The way all this information was gathered was not down to the individual level of parents or children. We don't have that information. We don't collect that information. It was used by nationally available data that is public for everyone, based on census tracts and census blocks. Okay, so that helped us to do that. Now we do know, because it comes up as questions oftentimes about how about Title I schools, the federal threshold is 50%. That is typically based on income. Again, we didn't do income as the sole factor for socioeconomic status. We took just income out of that because it's all of these things that inform diverse perspectives, difference, and it's not just a one cookie cutter size fit all for any person, any family, or any sector of our community. So these were the factors that we looked at using national available public data. We do get from the state of North Carolina which schools qualify under Title I for additional federal funding due to economic status in the school, but that's a little nuance. Just to give some context in this room, when my daughter was coming through school, she'll be 31 in a couple of weeks. I would have had to fill out a lunch application, a form to give income and all of that to say would I qualify for free or reduced meals or had to pay full price. A lot of schools now do not have to do that because there are certain metrics that are used based on the community that surrounds the schools. So some schools may be deemed community eligible, which means every kid, no matter where they come from, no matter what their family's income is, no matter any of these factors, would receive free meals for breakfast and lunch at the school. So just taking income alone would not have been a sufficient measure for that. So what we did find, I'll say this just really quickly, when we looked at the state data that says which schools, and we was looking at a comparison across census tract, like we noticed some some areas where it said, this is a Title I school, but it's saying this is, about this area, and we was like, wait a minute, we need to go back and look. And so we had to do some of that delving, research, and understanding of our community, around these particular factors. Before we get into just showing you where we landed, kind of why we landed where we did, we want to show you what we did from that soft launch June through December. We had 108 listening sessions across the entire county. We also did a survey, so people could survey and participate in an in-person or virtual listening session, or they could have just done the survey only. It was totally, we left that open. We had about a little over 8,400 people complete the survey. We had about 3,400 people attend one of the listening sessions, and we had almost 12,000 people involved directly or through indirect engagement. We also, Urban Strategy supported canvassing in neighborhoods, tacking alongside us for different community events. We did a lot of the back to school events and other events that were like large scale things that were happening in the community, and we're still looking for those opportunities. Actually now, on that link, hopefully it'll switch down here at the bottom. Yes. Just while I'm here, I just wanted to show you here on this, the link at the bottom of the slide. We'll definitely, you have all of this information already. One of the things we really wanted to do is be transparent with the community. We know no process is perfect. So we've had our fair share of questioning and critique, while we've also had applaud and praise for the work. And so we appreciate all of the feedback. But one of the things that we've done is when we were in the first round of engagement, we built out a webpage. We have it linked that shows what people were saying, where we were hearing information from. We worked very hard to understand too where we were hearing voices, so that in places where we were not getting as much voice, that we could like shift some resources or, have more intentional outreach and try to connect with more people in the community. We still have lots of work to do. The page that Frank also showed you, that since that part, there's a report there, it's called a community feedback report. It looks different than when, most organizations or nonprofits will put out a report that's like a PDF that is pages and pages and pages long. Instead, this is a report that actually shares the stories and connects stories to data that we heard from across the community. And then through this one also, you can click to be able to go in, see the proposed maps. Keep in mind, it's the first draft of maps. So if you hear people say, oh, they've already made a decision. No, we have not. We absolutely have not. We heard that when we first started. It was circulating and we heard that they already have maps. We don't know why they're doing this. Well, we didn't have any maps at that point in time. And so this is just the first set of maps. Frank's going to talk a little bit about, those maps and why they're shaped the way they are right now. But this is just the first iteration. And where we're going next is now all the way to the end of April, we want to hear from people across every sector of our community about the proposal. What do you like? What do you not like? It's not a vote to say, I like this one better than others, even though we've heard from some people that I really like this map. And if you, like one person sent us a message and said, if you go with this map, I was going to put my child in private school, but I will leave them in public schools. So we've heard things like that, but we've also heard like, leave it as it is. I don't want change. So we're hearing a wide gamut. But then we're also hearing some other things that Frank will talk to you about. So this feedback cycle is important to help us to make the maps better, so that we can then come back to the community and say, here's what we heard, here's how we use the information. These are the next set of proposed maps. And with the next set, we want to get feedback as well. So we still have some time to go before a final map is ready to go as a proposal to the school board.
Thank you again. So speaking specifically to the maps, we did end up with some options, and I'm going to dive into what this means and what the stars mean in just a moment, but I want to take a second to talk about that question of leave it as it is. So there's a very reasonable reason why there is no option for leave it as it is on there. And that is because there's no economic diversity, any reason to use our current maps. Our current maps are highly inefficient. So a lot of people, when we first started this process, they said, we're scared, we think you're gonna bus our kids. And my response to them is, we're currently busing your kids. We're currently busing your kids to further away, less diverse schools. Let us fix it. So that's why very important to know that map A, B, and C are not comprehensive. It might not end up looking exactly like any of these maps. These are exemplar maps to show what it would look like if we give different weights to the priorities that we came up with through community feedback. So here's our map priorities. I'm gonna go down by columns kind of. So our map priorities are diversity, home to school distance, school feeder patterns, and student enrollment. Student enrollment means we can't just send all the kids to one school. We can't leave some schools empty. So that one you'll notice is checked off for all maps. So now going through, like, map A is an example where we say we're gonna 100% focus the most on diversity. We're still not gonna bus kids across town, but we are gonna try to do the very best we can with small changes to the shapes of our boundaries to get as much diversity as we can in our schools. This map does not deliver the idea that it's gonna make home to school distance way better or feeder patterns way better. In fact, that's why they reach 1 star. Home to school distance goes up very, very slightly with map A on average, but not a lot. It's not a huge busing initiative. And then school feeder patterns actually goes up a lot, because this is something where this is the map that would have happened if we didn't listen to the community and didn't take feeder patterns into account. And what happens with feeder patterns there, just to give you some specifics, is currently we have 40 feeder splits in our district, meaning there's 40 different times where a kid would go through a different pathway from elementary, middle to high, which honestly sounds like a lot, but for a district our size, we're on the low average side of things, because there's always reasons, like you may be way closer to a high school, but further from an elementary school, and there's all these reasons that are complex that probably is outside the scope of this talk to explain why that happens. But so we have 40. Under map A, it goes up to 107. So maybe not delivering on that. Map B, however, gives almost the same results with our diversity, not almost the same. So we go from a 20% increase in diversity to a 15% increase in diversity with map B. But our home to school distance drops substantially. So it goes from maybe 3 miles average to 2.5, so a half mile off on average across the entire district. That's a lot of gas. That's a lot of bus routes. So that's a big change there. So that's why we give it 4 stars. And the school feeder patterns actually drop from 40 down to 34. So we are able to deliver on both of those things while still increasing diversity by an appreciable margin. Map C says, maybe diversity isn't our main goal when we want to try to update residential boundaries. People could agree to disagree and say, don't put that the lowest. In that case, map C gives about an 8% increase in diversity still. That's why it's only 2 stars. Doesn't make it worse, but it only makes it a little better. Which, in the context of this discussion, we were talking about how we're long overdue to do something about that. So maybe that's not as much of an increase as we'd like as a community. Home to school distance gets even better than the previous one, because that's going to be weighted the most. And so instead of a 0.5 average mile drop, it's like a 0.75 average mile drop. So again, a little bit more efficient. School feeder patterns, notice they're both 5 stars because they're almost the same. This one actually has one more feeder pattern than that one. So 35 versus 34, I think it is. So those are the 3 maps that are exemplars. These are not, hey, community, here's some maps, pick which one you want to be the map. It's instead, community, here's some exemplars, show us what you like and don't like about them. Help us update to make an even better version of these that takes into account the human perspective, right? So these are computer generated. So anytime you're doing a huge systemic change, kind of need the help with computers. And so they update, but they don't know necessarily the shape of a cul-de-sac. They may be cutting a cul-de-sac in half, where 3 houses of that cul-de-sac go to one school and 2 go to another. And we don't want to do that to families, and families don't want that to be done to them. So those are the sorts of things that we're really looking for in this phase. Show us where your community's been cut in half. Show us where, and it's interesting because a lot of our feedback is, you terrible people, you cut my community in half. And our answer is, thank you for telling us. So we really are trying to make those updates on those metrics. I think that's actually all I have to say about the maps, but I'm happy to start taking questions, or do you want to say something else?
Okay. Start taking questions. So help me understand here. You have more things you're going to say, or are we shifting into the total Q&A?
We can shift that to the whole Q&A.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so your questions, Mary, and when you ask a question, be sure I hear it. I'm going to repeat it for the sake of the people that are listening online. And if I say it wrong, you can correct. Okay.
Well, first of all, you cut off the borders of our community. We let you know that. But secondly, I was wondering what percentage of students will be moving from a higher performing school to a lower performing school? Because I think even though I support the project, that is my major concern, because where you move to a lower performing school, home values will also plummet.
Okay, that's a question that has a lot of thought in it. So what in these plans, what percentage of kids would have to move to a different level of performance by the school? Because that will also affect not only the kids, but home values. Did I sort of get it? Okay.
I'd be happy to answer that. First of all, thank you for giving us the feedback, like I said. But also, what I'll say for the percentage of kids moving. So that's a really important point. So I'm going to say the overall, but I'll also say to see the specific school change, you can plug in an address and look at the change for every single school. You can also look on each map exactly the changes. That would be a lot of percentages to give you. But let me give you the overall percentages to start with, and then of course we can follow up and I can look at specifics for you if you'd like. So overall, map A moves about 24% of students from the current residential zone to a new residential zone. Map B is about 20%, map C is about 16%. So 16%, yeah. So again, 80% of students aren't going to see a change. 80% of residences are not going to see a change. Again, this is just adjusting the margins. As far as moving from a higher performing to a lower performing school, to your specific question, what I'll say is, if you go in and look, if that happened, it's probably because that person lived closer to that higher performing school. And if it didn't happen, then it might be a change where if you move someone further away from their current school, that might be something where we need to update a community, because we are looking at some very specific communities where drive times have gone up, and that wasn't the goal. And because another thing that we noticed is and of course it's out there on social media, I'll go ahead and address it. There's 2 specific communities that are very much affected in a way that was not intended. The very southeast corner of our county got shifted for high school, got shifted from West Forsyth to Parkland. And those people are having to drive a lot further and sometimes through a different county to get to Parkland. And that wasn't the intention. So that's something we need to update. And then also in Kernersville, there's a section, I think it's called like Abington Homes or something like that, where it really cut up their community into tiny little pieces inside of different places. I really dug into why that happened. And what I figured out was it had to do not with socioeconomic diversity, it had to do with feeder patterns. Those people all were right on the border of being closer to either East Forsyth High or Walkertown High. And if they were closer to Walkertown High, it shifted them to Walkertown Elementary from Piney Grove Elementary, and was trying to make the feeder pattern situation better. So it was kind of a long-winded answer, but what I'll say too is, I think all students want to go to high-performing schools. So we're going to try to adjust things so that people go to their closest school, and then it comes out how it comes out. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I've had a lot of feedback from people saying, hey, you've shifted me to a lower performing school. And then when I look it up, 5 or 6 different times, so there might be cases where that doesn't happen, but when I looked up 5 or 6 different cases, they were 2-3 miles closer to their new school. So there's definitely some give and take there.
So that does come up a lot of times with performance. So with boundaries, it is an operational function that should be happening in school systems periodically and not wait 32 plus years, right, to do as one issue. I always struggle a lot with performance grades because those performance grades are not a true reflection of what is happening in schools. So I visit schools a lot. We have our superintendent open up the schools. She's been doing see for yourself at the high school, so you can sign up and be added to the list of going to those different schools. And what people see, and even we just did Principal for a Day in February from community partners going to schools. I don't know if any of you were part of that or know somebody who was, but what they walked away with saying is that what I'm seeing in schools is not what I hear. So there are lots of perceptions out there about schools that paint a certain picture of schools that is not necessarily the full reality. I don't think any place is perfect. Like if I even say my home, like I love my home where I live at. I love the people that are in my house, but it's not a perfect place. There's always work that needs to be done. At each school, in each school environment, our principals work hard every day to create environments that are welcoming and supportive. They work hard to have high quality instruction, and that is a goal for school systems, period. Things around raising achievement and that continued work and supporting the social and emotional well-being of students, because schooling, so I'm kind of old in the game now. I can concur with you. Like that's been a long time. I remember when I first started out with teaching, we were talking about teaching to the whole child. And over time, I've seen all these ebbs and flows of different types of reading programs, like all kinds of different things. And at some point in time, we forgot about the whole child. And this is just my personal opinion because I was in it, that it was just very one-sided. What we hear or what research says from employers, universities and colleges is that they want well-rounded individuals to hire and attend their schools. That means not only do they have academic knowledge, but they also have the skill set to work collaboratively with people from all different backgrounds. They want people who are empathetic and understanding. They want people who have critical thinking skills and are problem solvers. Children that I have worked with over the years that come from communities that have been underserved, under-resourced. There's been divestment from, have been some of the greatest problem solvers and critical thinkers I've ever worked with. Like I could have something going on and they have figured it out. So I do want us to continue to work on countering a narrative about schools as being good versus bad. I oftentimes ask families, tell me what you mean by good, because every child is also different and needs are different and supports are different. Yes, we need people like you to continue advocating at the state and the federal level, not to strip funding from public schools, but to continue to pour into public schools, because public schools is the one place where we serve everybody. We serve everybody. And when I think about everybody that we're serving, it is not about serving one community less than another. It is about how do we work as a system to have high quality for everybody. I'll say this too. When schools, what research has found too, when schools are socioeconomically diverse and more integrated, not just they're on paper, but they are truly in classes and learning and being alongside each other, is that there's higher retention amongst teachers There is higher graduation rates. There is improved achievement for all students, as well as many of the other things that I mentioned. So when we started this process, that has become the question that has come up a lot about academic excellence. That's what we want for every single child that we serve. Every single child. Everyone. And so programming like through magnet programs, we just got a Magnet Schools of America grant last year, right? That we have not had since the early 2000s probably. Like that type of funding that comes helps us to create great programs in our school system. It helps us to bring quality, high-level professional development to teachers. So there's multiple, this is what I said to the community group yesterday. It has to be a multi-pronged approach to having high outcomes for everybody. It can't just be a one single thing. And boundaries fix one issue that we have in our system, and it won't fix all things, okay? So I don't know if you want me to just go, I saw two hands. Okay, I saw your hand first, and then we'll come to your hand.
So I was going to what happens after the boundaries are settled.
Okay.
Right? So, and how we approach our teaching staff who, because of the way that our schools have been for many years, many teachers are only used to teaching one type of child. And that's the whole spectrum, like certain schools that teach. So how are we thinking about, and I'm sure we are, about how we help our teachers understand how to teach all children? Because I worked in the system a really long time and I've served a lot of classrooms. And I found that contrary to what a lot of people believe, in some of our high performing schools, I saw the worst teaching because the kids were compliant, right? The worst kind of teaching, the worst kind of instruction. And I was, that's just true. So what happens with the instruction?
So the question for the virtual audience is what happens after boundaries are drawn? How do you prepare teachers? And from the experience of a teacher who did it for a very, very long time, in some of our schools, high performing, some of the worst teaching that was seen, and now that you may have a shift in students that are in your building, how do you prepare teachers for that? So that is a really, really great question. I went through that at a magnet school that I taught at, and that was the exact conversation that we had as we saw a shift in students. Here's the thing that I always ask school leaders and teachers when they are talking about a change in different demographics is what are the assets that the students are bringing to the school and not relying on deficits, but sometimes that's where we get stuck. When we think about the professional development that teachers have, that definitely should be included. There are evidence-based strategies that work for all children, but it's also about having high expectations for all children too. There's lots of work that's already been happening in terms of professional development, coaching, working with school leaders about how to raise rigor in schools. We're seeing a lot of growth in our schools, particularly ones that the state sees as low performing. Cook Elementary is probably one of the greatest examples. While they are not fully there, just the growth that they've had in the last 2 to 3 years has been phenomenal, and replicating that in other places is also really, really important. I will also say that I love to see the A, B, C schools, the high performing, but I oftentimes always ask, are the students really growing or are they just proficient? And so those are questions we have to ask too, because if a student is proficient, but they're not making any growth, like I've seen that in my teaching experience too, and being a leader, kids consistently making 5s or 4s, and it's as if they have maxed out, but they haven't, because each year they should be making growth. But if you're seeing, they may be showing proficiency, but if they're not showing continued growth, then, I have to question that too, like, how do we get children who are already performing to grow? Research has shown that students who come together from different backgrounds, students that are already proficient, it does not hurt them. It doesn't cause harm to them. It does not lower their proficiency rates, but it does support students who may not be proficient, just simply because of access and exposure. So thank you for that question. There's definitely work we have to do. As I mentioned earlier, we are in the process of strategic planning. And so programs that we bring, professional development that we do, all those things are what supports teachers to be effective in their classrooms every day, no matter where they teach. I would also say too, a lot of the teachers that we have now are either very new or this is a second career. So I teach, as you heard, college students. A lot of my students right now have a degree in something, but are now wanting to move into teaching. So we have a robust beginning teachers program that supports new teachers, connect them with a mentor, preferably in their building, that can give guidance and support to. Because I didn't know what I didn't know when I first started out. And then when I became what they considered a veteran, which meant you were an old teacher, had been doing it for a long time, I still needed support to grow. And so that can't be addressed with boundaries, but that would be another part of work. So great question.
In addition to that, the question is one over there.
Okay.
Really quick, just to quickly piggyback on everything she said, just because this is kind of my area of expertise. I was a teacher, instructional facilitator, and a principal. And when I went to get my advanced degree, I actually did my thesis on this type of question, and it was specifically around, this idea of good schools have good teachers, good schools have good kids, bad schools have bad teachers, bad schools have bad kids. And that's obviously not true from our lived experience. But I also think that there's a lot of literature out there that still says it's true, which is upsetting. Like all this deficit mindset about, and a lot of it's Ruby Payne, all these different things we talk about how, poor kids have deficits in their brains. They can't possibly, that's not reality. There are brilliant children in all socioeconomic backgrounds. So I think to your point, it's also helping teachers understand that you're not getting worse kids. You're not getting better kids. You're getting different kids. And they have just as much opportunity, just as much ability to grow.
I think I need clarification on this. What the work that you all are doing is specifically geared to our residential schools. We are still keeping the zone choice plan. We don't know if we'll have the zone choice plan. How do these two things go?
Sure. Yeah, so the question was about a clarification of what this process is and whether it has to do with choice or residential boundaries. So the answer is this process is only about residential boundaries at this time. When our superintendent was asked this question during the press conference that we had for this project, she said, we may need to look at how we do choice in the future. We're not saying that it's not something that needs to be updated, but we are saying for this process, let's get our default figured out. That's why I mentioned some of those like statistics, 70% of students go to the residential school. So to clarify, I hope that helps.
And then question here, and then I see your hand as well.
This comes from our online.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a question about the way the schools are graded. I'm wondering if there's an expectation that overall in the county, the school grades will improve once a new map.
So the question was, based on how the schools are graded, do we think that after these changes, those school grades are going to change? The answer is the school grades are always changing. So yes, the school grades will change, but that is not the goal of this process. As Dr. McMillian stressed a few times, this is an operational process about getting kids to schools that make sense for them based on their residents. While all those other things are incredibly important, they're not the goal of this process. So no, this process isn't going to directly correlate with those grades, and we don't maintain those letter grades. So a lot of those have a lot of subjective things. as we all discussed, there's lots of other factors about what makes a good school besides those single letter grades.
There was a question here and then we can cut. So mine is actually, it's more of an operational question. I know that bus driver shortages and bus routes have been a big issue in our county. Have y'all started looking at, like, with these maps, like how that might improve those? Are you kind of doing the maps and then like figuring out the other stuff?
The question, it's a really good question. The question is, there's been bus driver shortages, there's been bus issues, and we're aware of those, and we heard about those a lot during our listening sessions. Have we started looking at what the maps will mean for those things? And the answer is no. But the second part of your question is, are we waiting to get a better map before we do? Yes. So because these are early drafts, and we want to sort of fix the things that we know are going to be inefficient, like that southeast corner and other stuff. Oh, really quick about the southeast corner going from west to Parkland. I do want to mention that because thank you for the ups about the MSAP, the grant, the big $50 million grant. One of the grant schools is Parkland. So I am more than happy to go ahead and send less kids to Parkland residentially, because we're going to have an influx of people that are excited about International Baccalaureate going to Parkland, and Parkland's already very full. So there's lots of things that, help that. But yes, we will look at buses once we get a more finalized version of it.
You mentioned grandfathering as, a current, system that's in place. Can you explain how that works now and then how that might change?
So grandfathering, yes. The question was, can you explain how grandfathering works currently with our system and how it could look after we make any sort of updates to the residential boundaries? And the answer to that is, first of all, let me just define what grandfathering is. It is when a student no longer lives in a residential boundary, but is still allowed to continue going to that school, even though they no longer live in that residential boundary. It could be because they moved, or it could be because we changed the boundaries. So, so the way it works now, I mentioned I'm over student assignment, so I deal with these cases all the time. The way it works now is you're guaranteed a seat. You can stay at that school. The tricky part is transportation, right? So a lot of times when people haven't moved too far, if it happens to be within a choice zone where we already have bus routes, it's one place where our choice program helps because we're able to still provide bus transportation. We always try to provide bus transportation in those cases, but there's not a way to guarantee bus transportation for grandfathering currently. With changes to maps, if we're trying to make a change that disrupts families as little as possible, we want to make sure that we're able to keep transportation for things like grandfathering, but we're not sure what that's going to look like yet. So that's why one thing that we often stress in these community sessions is that this is a planning process, not an implementation process. So we're just trying to get a good plan in place to get through the board, not next year, but the year after, so that we can then spend that entire year, next school year, trying to figure out questions like yours, like how will we figure out transportation when buses have to go to two different places because there's two different boundaries. I'm hopeful because, again, we're only moving about 20% of residences. I'm hopeful because currently, again, there may be changes. Currently, there is a choice process where people can still choose different schools. And when you're talking about only a 20% change, there's a much smaller percentage of the people that changed that don't like their new school. So I think we can accommodate, I think it's a relatively small amount when you're talking about serving over 50,000 students. So, but as far as the specifics, we will have to look into that during that year of implementation planning.
Yeah, I would just like to comment on what you said, Dr. McMillian, about perception, public perception. I worked in a low-performing school for a number of years. And invariably, when people from the community would come into the schools and visit, the response was, how are you a D school? This doesn't make sense. When they would see the classrooms and they would see the teaching that was going on, they were so surprised and said, how can this be? So if there are opportunities with the come and see Is that open to the public?
So there's a way to sign up. I can send that, so you can send it out to everybody. And then I think Lisa Sugg, who is the admin to the board and the superintendent, captures all of that and then sends invites. Like, I know there's a wait list, but I know she sends invites.
And just one other second point, you were about proficiency. There are children at the schools who are proficient. They are proficient in K-12 dibbles. They get 3, 4s, and 5s on their EOGs. Not as many as in other schools, but they are proficient. And I would go out on a limb and say, if students who are showing proficiency in what's known as a high-performing school went into these schools, they would still continue to show proficiency.
Absolutely.
They would still make 3, 4s, and 5s on their EOGs.
Yes, for the online, I apologize. Retired educator, right?
Close.
Close. Indicated working in a school that was deemed low performing, and just the things that were happening when people visited from outside the school, their amazement and shock that the school was deemed low performing with all the great things that they saw happening in there, and the understanding that if students who are already proficient are learning alongside students that might not currently be proficient, that would not lower their proficiency. It would cause them not to be proficient. Was really kind of the statement versus the question. And I know you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I first wanted to piggyback on the grandfather question. It was clear on the website that current students will be grandfathered in, but what about siblings who have not started in the schools yet? And then also, we were one of those streets that kind of got cut off and isolated. So it's at a very micro level, but what is the best way to, I guess, bring that to your attention? And it appears that the distance data was incorrect where we were. So just wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, so to repeat the question, there was 2 questions. I'm gonna start with the second part first. You asked about streets that were cut off, and the distance data looked worse. I do wanna address
Well,
that.
not just worse, but it had our current school as 4.5 miles away. In actuality, it's just a little bit long.
Okay, so it had the wrong data for the was it elementary school or
Yes.
is it Brunson and Whitaker? Yes. So there is a known issue. So thank you for sharing that, and a lot of people have shared that with us. There was a known issue with Brunson and Whitaker because Brunson's address is looking to change. We need to update the map boundaries. So even though if you look in where the dot is for Brunson, it's got the dot in the right spot, but you'll see that the dot is like right on the edge of the boundary, even the new boundaries, which doesn't make sense. So that's another spot where we need to update. So one thing I would say is please have patience with us as we update that. You'll see much better, more accurate data on the next round of maps. But that is the stuff that we need to hear from the community about. The other question you had was grandfathering in and siblings. So we do also currently have a sibling preference policy in our district, and that policy will stay. And what that says is if you have a child at a school and then you have a younger child who's coming up, they can join the older child at that same school. Again, when we're talking about transportation efficiency, when we're talking about trying to do this in a way that helps our community, it doesn't help our community to have parents having to drive their kids to 2 separate elementary schools or 2 separate. So that's something that we're always gonna commit to. So hopefully that answers your question.
You're ready to close, so can I just give one reminder and we get ready to close? Bye. So just final reminder. That's been great questions. Many of these questions are ones that we are hearing over and over again. And we want this to be truly a community-driven process, and whatever we land on to be something that the community can get behind. We know everybody won't be happy in the process. We knew that it would be tough, I guess, going into the process when it hasn't happened for, 3 decades now. In other districts that have done it, have faced similar challenges because there are differing opinions and perspectives and how to make it better, and this won't work and all of those things. So we truly are. So I want to say this for the listening audience too, and for you in here. We are listening to the feedback, which is how we got to what was priority for people in the community. We wouldn't have known about feeder patterns. That was not even a top of mind consideration for us when we started this, had we not been listening to what the community was saying. We are hearing lots and lots of feedback now. as I started, all of the feedback, whether it is in support, anti, I would like some changes, but these changes, these are not the changes that I would necessarily be in support. Like, we want to hear all of that. We want to hear about split neighborhoods, split streets and things like that, because now we're going into a more granular level with the eye, the human eye. So the more people that are engaged in the process and can lift up those types of things, the better sense we have on the ground level. I left some flyers out there, so share with community members, share with family. Encourage them to get involved. We have a dashboard. That's where we need all feedback to go. So we can analyze all of it. And we're trying to capture it all in one place. Know that no changes will happen at the earliest is 26, 27. And what we're looking at is a phased in process, not like we want as minimal disruptions to families and students as possible, which is why we're taking our time. That's why we chose 2 years of planning and then a 1 year to develop a plan for implementation. So we know it's a long process, but we're trying to take our time to minimize any unintended consequences. We know it won't necessarily be perfect. I don't know any process that is. We're also taking time to learn from other districts that have done this more recently too, to help us to think through challenges that we see come up.